Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Conor Gray's Cocon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be asking the question of what if Britain had proportional representation? Now, for those who don't know, in 2011 there was an alternative vote referendum, which is the AV referendum, and this would have given Britain a form of proportional representation. Now, in this video, we're not going to go through all the different types of proportional representation. I'd highly recommend, checking those out on like different YouTube videos or, wherever you want to get your information from. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to be talking about just AV, okay? So for those who are unaware, that vote was very, very close. Just kidding. It was 32% for and 68% against, right? And this is quite strange because if you look at opinion polls, which we'll get into a little bit later, opinion polls kind of show that people in Britain want proportional representation. They're fed up of like first past the post, which is the traditional system that we already have. And most countries in the world have got rid of first past the post. It's only Britain, America, Canada, and a few other former British colonies that still have it. But for instance, Australia, they got rid of theirs like kind of decades ago, and same thing in New Zealand and many other places. So the reason why we didn't vote for AV was pretty much to do with party politics, and the party politics of that specific time. So for those who are unaware, in 2011, you had the Conservative Party in a coalition with the Lib Dems, and the Lib Dems, they're the ones who wanted proportional representation because obviously as a smaller party, they wanted to have a greater share in the number of votes that were in the UK Parliament. Now, one of the main problems that people had with the Lib Dems was that one of their campaign promises was to keep tuition fees in England, at £3,000 as opposed to what Conservatives wanted to push it to, which was £9,000. And obviously, them being part of a coalition with the Conservatives were, they took up about 90% of the seats within that coalition government. So it's something to kind of note as well that like it wasn't necessarily their fault, but their hands were tied. And the general public, especially many of the people who voted for them as like a protest vote, they were very disillusioned with them because they saw it as a betrayal of like their promise. So the tuition fees tripled, and as a result they kind of were seen as being complicit in that. So the referendum, rather than people really arguing about the merit of the argument, tended to end up being more of a kind of plebiscite against that coalition government, especially with regard to the Lib Dems. So this is why, like, for instance, the Labour Party, who, many of them would normally be in support of it, they end up coming out for the No campaign because they wanted to punish the Lib Dems. And so as a result, it wasn't close. It was actually 32% to 68%. And so so it's they really got like defeated, right? And actually the only places, as you can see on the map, the only places that voted for it tend to be either inner city places or places where you had a high youth turnout, especially in places like Oxford and Cambridge, right? But even places like that are seen as quite progressive, such as Bristol and Brighton, even there, like kind of the no vote narrowly won. So so as you can see, like kind of we don't have proportional representation, largely as a result of the party politics of that time. But what if that had gone differently? What if people had actually just voted on it based on the actual merit of the argument? How would British politics have been different in the last 10 years? Well, that's what we're going to look into in this video. So a quick caveat. In Britain, we already do have proportional representation in certain regards. So for instance, the London mayor is picked this way, and even the Conservative Party leadership, they end up being elected this way, in a very similar way to what you have with AV. So basically with AV, if you don't end up getting a majority of the votes, if you don't get like the 50% threshold, then what ends up happening is that in a series of kind of like runoffs, so you vote for your favourite candidates based on a kind of like ranking system, right? And basically what ends up happening is that if candidates don't end up reaching the 50% mark, then the least popular person gets eliminated, and you keep on going until you end up with 50%. So if it's good enough for the Conservative Party leadership, why should it not be like that for the rest of the country? And actually, when we were still part of the EU, we did have elections that were nationwide that were picked by proportional representation. And most notably of all was the 2014 European Parliament elections. So within that election, UKIP, which in Westminster at that time had 0 seats, and in total like the most they ever had was 2 seats, right? They end up winning that election, and this put a lot of pressure on the Conservative Party, which eventually led to them putting in their manifesto that there was going to be a vote on whether Britain would leave the EU and stuff. But we'll get onto that in a little bit. But that election, as we can see on the map here, it was a completely different thing from what it would normally be, you know, because when first past the post system, politics ends up being very tribal. There's people who are like Labour supporters who will not vote for Conservatives even if they align more with them, and there's people who are Conservatives who won't vote for Labour even though they align more with them, just because they're like, oh, I don't like these people within that party, so as a result, you know, I really, you know, I'll stick with a party which I don't really like, but like at least they're not as bad as those people, right? So, and you know, it tends to also be a thing where people in Britain, like these older parties kind of exist because they've always existed. You know, people vote because of how their father voted, how their grandfather voted, how their great grandfather voted, and so there's very few people in Britain who kind of like changed their mind and stuff under this kind of system. And it's estimated that about 20% of all voting is tactical, right? So people, you know, live in certain constituencies and they go, well, I like this person, I like this party. However, if I vote for them, then it's going to take votes off of a party which I don't really like, but like it's kind of more aligned with me. And as a result, a party that I really don't like, they're going to end up winning. So because of that, I'll vote tactically for a party which I'm a bit like meh about, rather than voting for what I actually want, which, you know, it's not great. Like if you go to the shops, you know, you buy what you want, right? You don't go all like I like oranges, but like you know, if like I better like buy some apples, otherwise bananas going to be too popular. You know, I know it doesn't work that way, kind of thing. But like within the marketplace, you vote for what you want, and you know, and you vote and you show that you vote for it by paying for it. Whereas with a first past the post system, you end up kind of no one really gets what they actually really want. So, and then also as well, there's a issue of people being disenfranchised. So if you're a conservative Brexiteer living in inner city London, you're not getting represented, right? You're not, you know, your MP is probably like a Labour supporter and they're probably a Remainer, right? So your voice not getting heard. Similarly, if you're a socialist who's pro-Remain and you live in the countryside, chances are you're going to be represented by a conservative Brexiteer. So there's not really that much like representation for a lot of people, and as a result, a lot of people don't end up actually voting that election. And then even people who, you know, you live in a constituency which is safe, like there's certain constituencies where it's like 70% vote for one way or 80% for another way. Well, if that's the case, why even go out and vote, right? Because you can go out and vote, but at the end of the day, the national government is not going to reflect how you vote anyway. So the system that we currently have discourages people from actually going out to vote unless they happen to live within very marginal seats and, you know, their vote will actually matter. However, with a proportional system, then a lot more people actually have a greater say. And, you know, you could see this in 2014 because people, didn't matter how you voted and stuff, you could actually vote for parties which you actually aligned with. And that's why, for instance, in 2014, UKIP ended up doing so well. And then what's funny as well is that the year after this, you know, you had the 2015 general election, and this ended up being one of the most disproportional elections of all time, right? This was, yeah, if you see like the, you know, the percentage of people who voted for different parties, and if you compare it to the number of seats people got, it's just completely out of whack. So the Conservatives end up getting 37% of the vote and end up having 51% of MPs. Labour got 30% of the vote and got 36% of MPs. UKIP got 13% of the vote and end up having one MP. Just one. Yeah, you know, it was something like 0.2% of the overall seats in Parliament end up going to UKIP, despite having almost 13% of the votes. Yeah, and like even like the Scottish Nationalist Party, you know, the SNP, they end up having 56 seats, yeah, even though they end up having a smaller vote share than UKIP did, and end up having a smaller vote share than Lib Dems end up having as well. So the first part of the post, it rewards geographic dominance, right? If you can hold down a certain region of the country, then you end up having more seats. But if your support is more evenly distributed around the country, well then, you know, if you're not able to get a majority in any of those places, then you don't get any representation in our parliament. So as we can see, obviously, with the 2015 general election, it really didn't matter how you voted in many places because, you know, you end up being disenfranchised in many places. But if you had a more proportional system of voting, this is what the results would be. As you can see on screen, there's many different voting systems that we have here. And as you can see, the Conservatives on the first past the post end up having 331 seats. But under a proportional system, yeah. So this is how they vote in the European Parliament. They would have had just 242, and then if they had AV, they would have 337. However, UKIP end up getting one seat in first past the post, but end up having 80 under a list proportional system, right? And then with AV, they end up getting one as well. There's also STV, which is the single transferable vote, which is we already have in Northern Ireland. And as you can see there, UKIP would have got 54 seats in that parliament. So depending on what kind of system you have, it has a different makeup, right? Now, a big argument that people have against proportional representation is that it makes it difficult for you to have strong government, yeah, in which one party governs. Yeah, and like this is quite a fair argument because as you can see from the numbers here, in order for, say, the Conservatives, yeah, to form a coalition, they had to align with UKIP, and then, you know, it would have been very difficult to kind of go over the line. And then, you know, and then similarly, like with Labour, yeah, like kind of it'd have to negotiate with many different parties, including probably the SNP. So them being in a coalition with the SNP would have been very unpopular for people south of the border because the SNP obviously wants Scottish independence. So it'd kind of be a poison chalice, yeah, to have them in your coalition because then they'd be pushing the whole time for Scottish independence, yeah, which would obviously break up the union. However, for Australia, this system seems to be working relatively well because, you know, they've had it for almost a century, right? So in their federal elections in 2019, this was the results for the major parties, right? So you had the Labour Party with 33.3% of the vote. And then you had the Liberal Party, which is probably the equivalent of our Conservative Party, yeah, and they had 28% of the vote. However, because the Liberal Party end up being in a coalition with the National Party and one of the other parties as well, they end up having a Liberal National Coalition of 41.4%. So obviously 41.4% is larger than 33.3. And because Australia has a kind of, you know, they have a similar system to AV, not exact yet, but they have a very similar system where it's a runoff kind of thing, and you know the weaker parties are kind of eliminated until you end up just with like two main ones. And so in turn, the result for that election ended up being 51.5% for the Liberal National Coalition and 48.5% for the Labour Party. So people in Australia voted for what party they thought like was best, right? So at the first stage, obviously they said this is my first preference, but because they were able to list in preferences, yeah, like what they wanted, then when all these different things end up getting eliminated, you end up with the two major ones, and you end up being like, okay, on the whole, we as the people prefer this party to govern us rather than the other one. Whereas obviously in the first past the post system, you have 37% of the Conservatives, yeah, and then they end up having 100% of the power, yeah. Whereas under this system, you have it a bit more shared. So, for instance, UKIP getting 13% of the vote in 2015. This combined with Conservative 37% would have, you know, it would have pretty much got a majority of seats already. And so if they had formed a coalition, then we know that they definitely would have had a Brexit referendum, and more likely than not, obviously, it still would have gone to the same result. Now, the only caveat I'll say with this timeline is this. I don't know whether the 2017 general election happens because that happened because David Cameron stepped down because he ended up losing the EU referendum, and then Theresa May ended up coming in and she was doing very popular in the polls, and so because she was riding so high and under the first past the post system it showed that she could then get a landslide, yeah, she was then tempted to go for it. However, under this kind of system, you know, while the Conservatives were riding quite high in the polls, like it wouldn't have had the same kind of devastating effect that it had in our timeline. So if you can see, if you like see like the 2019 general election, you know, the Conservatives end up, you know, absolutely like trouncing Labour. Yeah, they end up with 365 seats to Labour's 203. So you know, it was an overwhelming like kind of defeat at the ballot box, despite the fact that the Conservatives only had a few more percentages for the national vote than Labour did. So it's something to bear in mind that, like, as with anything with these alternative history things, what end up happening is probably the most likely thing. Like, more likely than not, the AV referendum would have still been lost in that same way. And, I think more likely than not, then, like, say for instance, if it had somehow magically won, I think that more likely than not, the actors who were in place, like, Theresa May, would have got ahead of herself when she saw the polls. She probably would have called general election. It's difficult, right? It's difficult to really say what would have happened. So unfortunately, that kind of period from about like 2016 to 2017, it's kind of a question mark as to what happened, because if that 2017 election had happened, then the kind of centre-right coalition that would have come together would have got beaten by any kind of like centre-left coalition that would have come together. Then there's also the fact of, would like the Lib Dems wanted to be in a coalition with Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, like so heavily socialist party with a kind of like centrist party, would they have wanted to do that? Would the Conservatives have wanted to be in a coalition with UKIP, which especially at that time was starting to go down a kind of a fringe, like kind of anti-Islam kind of like platform? It's that kind of period from 2016 to 2019 is quite a complex kind of thing, and I can't accurately kind of say what would happen. But what we can do is skip to 2019, because then it becomes a little bit clearer. So in 2019, you had the European elections coming again. And, as I said, UKIP had kind of gone down a very fringe path, and so they didn't have much support. And so Nigel Farage, who was, fed up with all this, he left that party and then formed the Brexit Party, And that Brexit Party, it came out of nowhere and completely topped the polls in this European election, And so as you can see, like the result of it, like this is like the map as it was. It's estimated that the Brexit Party in that time would have got 414 seats in Parliament, So this is absolutely overwhelming, right? The Conservative Party was relegated to, I think, 1 seat. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of what could have happened. And actually, with even the Westminster polls, in that summer of 2019, you can see here the Brexit Party being the dominant party, like kind of beating Labour and the Conservatives, and then also the Lib Dems sneaking in with like second place as well. So if you had a proportional system, it's very likely that the two parties which currently exist at the moment probably wouldn't exist as they currently do, because you have to understand the Conservative Party is made up of a coalition of different interest groups, as are the Labour Party. And within those parties, sometimes the difference between them is greater than is with those people and people in other parties. So the kind of centrists, for instance, within this party and within that party are more similar than they are with some of the people in their own party, right? And similarly, people who are more socially conservative, you've got people who are socially conservative and Brexiteer who vote Labour, and then you've got social liberals, like kind of like pro-Remainers who vote Conservative. So under this kind of system, people could break off, people could break off into smaller parties that actually better represent them. So you could have like a liberal conservative party, and you could have a kind of more working class, like kind of socially conservative Labour Party, right? There's endless kind of possibilities of how things would have turned out, but I think that summer of 2019 kind of gave us a snapshot of what British politics could look like if we got rid of first past the post and had proportional representation. But you know what does have proportional representation? The like button. So definitely hit that like button, because every vote counts on that, right? So if you like this video, then obviously hit that, turn it blue, and then but obviously with this we're aiming for 100%, maybe 95% at best, because there's always going to be some haters. But if you like this video, definitely hit the like button, and then also share with some friends. I know that some people they watch the video and they go, oh yeah, that's a good video, but you must have some friends who would enjoy the video as well. Like spread the love, spread it to people who would enjoy this kind of content. The channel's doing very well, and subscribers are going up. So if you haven't subscribed already, definitely hit the subscribe button and watch a whole lot more of our videos, because there's endless amount for it. And also the next video we're going to be doing is on what if Ross Perot won. So this is in the 1992 election within the US. So this was a third party candidate, and he was pushing again for like this sort of proportional representation as well in America. He was also pushing for a lot of other things as well, and he actually had a decent shot. There was one point in which he actually topped the polls, like beating the Democratic and the Republican candidates. So yes, definitely stay tuned for that. Yeah, because in that video we're going to be basically answering a similar kind of question of like, what would have happened if you had basically a third party in America. So definitely stay tuned for that. Once again, hit the like button and have a great day, and bye.